Good evening, and welcome to the Village Chapel for this first in our presentations of C.S. Lewis's The Chronicles of Narnia. Tonight, we begin with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Our story begins with the introduction of 4 children, from oldest to youngest. Peter, age 12, Susan, aged 11, Edmund at 9, and Lucy, who is 8. They were living in London with their parents at the beginning of World War II. But when German planes began bombing London, many parents sent their children to live out in the country with people who opened their houses to them, believing that this would be safer for their children than staying in London. The 4 children were sent to live with an old professor who lived all alone, except for a housekeeper and a few servants, in a very large house way out in the middle of nowhere. One day, when it was raining outside, the children decide to explore the enormous house. They go into a room with a large wardrobe, which is a freestanding closet. And seeing nothing else there, they continue exploring. But Lucy, the youngest, stays behind and looks into the wardrobe. It was filled with fur coats on hangers, and she walks into it and pushes aside the coats. As she does, she feels cold air in front of her. And as she moves forward, she suddenly finds herself in a strange, snowy forest. As she's walking around, wondering how this is happening to her, she meets a faun named Tumnus, who is surprised to see a human girl. Now, a faun is a Greek mythological character who is a goat from the waist down and who can walk on 2 feet, and he's human from the waist up. Tumnus explains to Lucy that she is in a place called Narnia, a completely different world from her own. He then invites her to his home for tea, and she accepts. They have a wonderful time together, but then Tumnus begins crying and confesses that he is a servant of the evil White Witch. The witch has enchanted Narnia with her evil power, so that it's always winter, but never Christmas. Tumnus goes on to confess that he has been commanded to capture any human beings who come into Narnia. Lucy begs Tumnus to release her so that she can go back, and he agrees. Lucy goes back through the wardrobe into her own world and eagerly tells her brothers and sister of her experience. But they don't believe her, because Lucy insists that she's been gone for hours, when to them it's only been a matter of seconds. So when they investigate the wardrobe, they conclude that it's only a piece of furniture. Edmund teases Lucy mercilessly about her imaginary world, until one day he sees her going into the wardrobe. He follows her there, and then finds himself in Narnia as well. He doesn't see Lucy, and instead meets the White Witch, riding in a sleigh that Tumnus had told Lucy about. The witch introduces herself to Edmund as the Queen of Narnia, and she then gives him some enchanted Turkish delight, which creates in him a ravenous hunger for the candy. Turkish delight is a confectionery a kind of candy that was popular in England at this time. The White Witch then uses Edmund's greed and gluttony to make him promise to bring his brother and sisters to meet her. On the way back to the wardrobe, at a large lamppost, which is the border between Narnia and our world, Edmund meets Lucy. Lucy tells Edmund about the White Witch, but Edmund denies any connection between the witch and the queen that he has just seen. All he can think about is getting more Turkish delight. Lucy and Edmund return to Peter and Susan in their own world. Lucy can't wait to tell her older brother and sister about Narnia, now that Edmund can back her up. But Edmund cruelly says that he and Lucy just made up the whole story. Peter and Susan are worried that Lucy might be losing her mind, and they talk to the professor about it. They're surprised when he argues that Lucy is probably telling them the truth. One day, when all 4 children hide in the wardrobe to avoid the housekeeper and some guests, suddenly they all find themselves in Narnia. And Peter gets upset with Edmund for having lied about it. And Peter and Susan apologize to Lucy for not believing her. Lucy leads them to Tumnus's house. But a note on the door informs them that Tumnus has been arrested for treason. Lucy realizes that the witch must have found out that Tumnus spared Lucy's life and that the White Witch has captured him. She begs her brothers and sister to help her rescue Tumnus from the witch. A friendly Robin guides them through the woods until they meet up with Mr. Beaver, who takes them to his home where they meet his wife, Mrs. Beaver. Mr. Beaver explains to the children there is nothing they can do now to save Tumnus, but what they must do is journey to find Aslan. They say Aslan is on the move, perhaps has already landed. And now a very curious thing happened. None of the children knew who Aslan was any more than you do. But the moment the beaver had spoken these words, everyone felt different. Perhaps it has sometimes happened to you in a dream, that someone says something which you don't understand, but in the dream it feels as if it has some enormous meaning, either a terrifying one, which turns the whole dream into a nightmare, or else a lovely meaning, too lovely to put into words, which makes the dream so beautiful that you remember it all your life and are always wishing you could get into that dream again. It was like that now. At the name of Aslan, each one of the children felt something jump in its inside. Edmund felt a sensation of mysterious horror. Peter felt suddenly brave and adventurous. Susan felt as if some delicious smell or some delightful strain of music had just floated by her. And Lucy got the feeling you have when you wake up in the morning and realize that it is the beginning of the holidays or the beginning of summer. "Who is Aslan?" asked Susan. "Aslan," said Mr. Beaver. "Why, don't you know? He's the king. He's the lord of the whole wood, but not often here, you understand. Never in my time or my father's time, but the word has reached us that he has come back. He is in Narnia at this moment. He'll settle the White Queen, all right. It is he, not you, who will save Mr. Tumnus. You'll understand when you see him. But shall we see him?" asked Susan. Why, daughter of Eve, that's what I brought you here for. I'm to lead you where you shall meet him, said Mr. Beaver. Is he a man? Asked Lucy. Aslan a man? Said Mr. Beaver sternly. Certainly not. I tell you, he is the king of the wood and the son of the great emperor beyond the sea. Don't you know who is the king of the beasts? Aslan is a lion, the great lion. Ooh, said Susan. I thought he was a man. Is he quite safe? I shall feel rather nervous about meeting a lion. That you will, dearie, and make no mistake, said Mrs. Beaver. If there's anyone who can appear before Aslan without their knees knocking, they're either braver than most or just plain silly. Then he isn't safe, said Lucy. Safe, said Mr. Beaver. Don't you hear what Mrs. Beaver tells you? Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe, but he's good. He's the king, I tell you. As they were plotting on how to meet up with Aslan the next day at a place called the Stone Table, they notice that Edmund has disappeared. He's gone to find the White Witch to warn her about Aslan's arrival and the beaver's plan. He travels to her castle, where the witch is enraged to find that Aslan is in Narnia, and she begins plotting how she can kill the children because she wants to avoid an ancient prophecy that says that 4 humans will someday reign over Narnia and overthrow her evil regime. The other 3 children and the beavers, meanwhile, hurry to reach the Stone Table before the witch. As they travel, wonderful seasonal changes occur. First, they meet Santa Claus, or Father Christmas, who announces that the witch's spell of always winter, but never Christmas, has ended. He also gives each of the children a gift that they will need later. The enchanted winter snow is beginning to melt, and the children see signs of spring. At the same time, the witch is rushing to the Stone Table, but not very quickly, because as the snow melts, her sled becomes useless. She takes Edmund with her and treats him along the way very poorly. When the other 3 children meet Aslan, they are in awe of this enormous lion, but they quickly grow more comfortable in his presence. They love him immediately, despite their fear. Aslan promises he will do all he can to save Edmund. Then Aslan takes Peter aside to show him the castle where he will one day be a king. As they are talking, they hear Susan from a distance blowing the magic horn that Father Christmas had given her, signaling that she is in danger. Aslan sends Peter to help her. Arriving on the scene, Peter sees a wolf attacking Susan, and he stabs it to death with the sword given to him by Father Christmas. But Aslan sees another wolf escaping into the woods and sends some of his followers to trail it, hoping the wolf will lead them to the witch. As the rescue party arrives, the witch is preparing to kill Edmund. Aslan and his followers rescue Edmund, but the witch escapes, disguising herself as a part of the landscape. Edmund is happy to see his brother and sisters, but repentant, having realized how the evil witch has really been. Aslan takes him aside and forgives him, and then tells the other children that Edmund is back, and there'll be no more talk about his betrayal. The next day, the witch and Aslan meet, and the witch demands Edmund's life because of his treason. She says that according to the deep magic of Narnia, a traitor's life is forfeit to the witch. Aslan does not deny this, and he then secretly reaches a compromise with the witch. After the meeting, the witch appears very pleased with herself, while Aslan looks thoughtful and sad. The next night, Susan and Lucy notice that Aslan is becoming gloomy. They are unable to sleep, and looking for Aslan, they see he has disappeared. When they find Aslan, he tells them they can stay with him until he tells them to leave. Together they walk to the stone table, where Aslan tells them they must leave now. Susan and Lucy hide behind some bushes, where they see the witch and her followers torment, humiliate, and finally kill Aslan. "Oh, how can they?" said Lucy, tears streaming down her cheeks. The brutes, the brutes." For now that the first shock was over, the shorn face of Aslan looked to her braver and more beautiful and more patient than ever. "Muzzle him," said the witch. And even now, as they worked about his face, putting on the muzzle, one bite from his jaws would have cost 2 or 3 of them their hands. But he never moved. And this seemed to enrage all that rabble. Everyone was at him now. Those who had been afraid to come near, even after he was bound, began to find their courage, and for a few minutes the 2 girls could not see him. So thickly was he surrounded by the whole crowd of creatures, kicking him, hitting him, spitting on him, jeering at him. At last she drew near. She stood by Aslan's head. Her face was working and twitching with passion, but his looked up at the sky, still quiet, neither angry nor afraid, but a little sad. Then just before she gave the blow, she stooped down and said in a quivering voice, "And now, who has won? Fool, did you think by all this you would save the human traitor? Now I will kill you instead of him, as our pact was, and so the deep magic will be appeased. But when you are dead, what will prevent me from killing them as well? And who will take him out of my hand now? Understand that you have given me Narnia forever. You have lost your own life, and you have not saved his. In that knowledge, despair and die." The children did not see the actual moment of the killing. They couldn't bear to look and had covered their eyes. After the witch and her followers leave in what they think is triumph, Susie and Lucy stay with Aslan's dead body all night. When they awake the next morning, they hear a great cracking noise. At that moment, they heard from behind them a loud noise, a great cracking, deafening noise, as if a giant had broken a giant's plate. "What's that?" said Lucy, clutching Susan's arm. The rising of the sun had made everything look so different. All colors and shadows were changed, that for a moment they didn't see the important thing. Then they did. The stone table was broken into 2 pieces by a great crack. that ran down it from end to end, and there was no Aslan. "Oh, oh, oh," cried the two girls, rushing back to the table. "Oh, it's too bad," sobbed Lucy. "They might have left the body alone." "Who's done it?" cried Susan. "What does it mean? Is it magic?" "Yes," said a great voice behind their backs. "It is more than magic." They looked round. There, shining in the sunrise, larger than they had seen him before, shaking his mane, for it had apparently grown back again, stood Aslan himself. "Oh, Aslan," cried both the children, staring up at him, almost as much frightened as they were glad. "Aren't you dead then, dear Aslan?" said Lucy. "Not now," said Aslan. "You're not a," asked Susan in a shaky voice. She couldn't bring herself to say the word ghost. Aslan stooped his golden head and licked her forehead. The warmth of his breath and a rich sort of smell that seemed to hang about his hair came all over her. "Do I look it?" he said. "Oh, you're real. You're real. Oh, Aslan," cried Lucy, and both girls flung themselves upon him and covered him with kisses. "But what does it all mean?" asked Susan, when they were somewhat calmer. "It means," said Aslan, "that though the witch knew the deep magic, there is a magic deeper still, which she did not know. Her knowledge goes back only to the dawn of time. But if she could have looked a little further back, into the stillness and the darkness before time dawned, she would have read there a different incantation. She would have known that when a willing victim who had committed no treachery was killed in a traitor's stead, the table would crack and death itself would start working backwards. And now, Aslan carries the girls on his back to the witch's castle. She's not there. She's with her army of followers. And Aslan frees all the animals, including Tumnus, who had been turned into stone by the witch. Then Aslan, Susan, and Lucy rush to join the battle between Peter's army and Aslan's followers with the witch's troops. Peter and Edmund fight bravely, but they're exhausted and near defeat. And Aslan, when he arrives, he kills the witch, and Peter's army is able to rout the witch's followers. Edmund is mortally wounded by the witch, but Lucy's gift from Father Christmas of a magic elixir saves his life. Aslan then knights Edmund and the other children for their bravery, and they are seated on their thrones at the castle of Cair Paravel, the biggest castle in Narnia, fulfilling the ancient prophecy. But amidst all these rejoicings, Aslan himself quietly slipped away. And when the kings and queens noticed that he wasn't there, they said nothing about it, for Mr. Beaver had warned them. "He'll be coming and going," he had said. "One day you'll see him, and another you won't. He doesn't like being tied down. And of course, he has other countries to attend to. It's quite all right. He'll often drop in. Only you mustn't press him. He's wild, you know, not a tame lion." Thank you, and I hope that you'll join us next week for a presentation on Prince Caspian.